using the clicker is usually the hardest part. Okay, so let's talk about using NativeScript and Angular 2 to build apps for robots. But first, I'm going to introduce myself. So I am Sebastian Witalec, or if you follow people on Twitter, I'm Seba Vita. Nice pictures with me and my minions are very welcome. A little bit about me, I work for Telerik, the guys who created NativeScript, amongst many other tools for developers. I was born and raised in south of Poland, which makes me a South Pole. Now is the moment you laugh. Seriously. Okay, let's get to the point. So what is NativeScript? I think I owe you a little bit of explanation. So it's an open source framework which allows you to use Angular or JavaScript to build mobile applications. And the cool thing about it is that the mobile apps that you're building give you 100% native UI. So you get great performance and a great user experience, as you would expect from a mobile application. And the first thing people go like, well, so you use JavaScript, like, is it like PhoneGap? No, it's not, because PhoneGap has a web view, and basically you have a website inside a container, which kind of pretends and behaves like a mobile application, but it's not exactly the same thing. There is no DOM, there is just a native UI inside NativeScript. Another comparison is it like Xamarin? So the big difference is Xamarin does this cross-compilation of the code. So you write your stuff in C#, and when you build the application for, let's say, iOS, you get everything compiled into Xcode, right? We don't do that. The JavaScript code that you write stays as JavaScript within the application. We just execute it at runtime. And then another one is, well, comparing to React Native and Accelerator, which we are very, very similar in terms of concept. Like, all of those frameworks are pretty much JavaScript native frameworks. The big difference is that in NativeScript, you get direct access to the native API. So if there is a function that exists natively on either on Android or iOS, you can call it directly using just JavaScript. So you don't have to learn how to write Xcode or how to write Java. You can do everything just from one language. And obviously, we created initially NativeScript just for JavaScript. And in May last year, we had guys from Angular reaching out to us, and they said, hey, we're just building Angular 2. How about you build like the extension so that NativeScript becomes like the face of Angular 2? I was like, well, Angular's coming, why not, right? Let's do it. So straight away, every Tuesday, we set up like a Google Hangouts, and Tobias Bosch from the Angular team was meeting with Christo Deshev, who's our lead developer for the Angular integration. And right off the beginning, we were planning the world domination, right? It was just like, this was the first thing on our minds. And this is the screenshot of the first Google Doc from the first meeting. And straight away, we're looking at the platform agnostic architecture of Angular 2, of how it worked. So the idea is that basically, when you build Angular 2 applications, you write your, let's say you define your UI using the markup, then you have some sort of a DOM adapter that takes the markup and then turns into like a node tree, and then we compile it into a set of proto views. And basically, this kind of process is just basically says, how does Angular work underneath? Like, you know, how does ngEve works? How do you do the binding and everything? The cool thing is that all the services and components, until you actually want to render them, they're platform agnostic. They don't really say, you know, how to display it in a web browser or desktop, which basically means that we can then add this platform-specific renderer, which then generates something in the UI when you actually want to build a web application or a desktop application or a mobile application, right? So then we come from, with NativeScript, and we say, okay, we're going to use HTML as the markup, and then parse 5 that's going to turn HTML into a node tree, and then we just use the standard compiler to give the standard proto views. And this was the easy part. The hard part was to actually implement the NativeScript renderer, which was basically generating the native UI. Right? So we already had the experience of how to do that for JavaScript. We just had to redo that for Angular, and we had it work. So pretty much the day after Angular 2, the full version was released, we released NativeScript 2.3, which had the full support for Angular 2. You know, like we work with these guys very closely throughout the whole process, through all the fun and games of release candidates as well. So all of this pretty much means that we can do really cool stuff. And one of the things we want to do is like do this to-do MVC example, right? Typical stuff. But the problem was we didn't have a checkbox in NativeScript, right? What do? So say, well, let's create a NativeScript component, sorry, an Angular component. So we created this component with selector checkbox, and the template was just simple image that basically, if checked was true, we show in one image. If it's not true, we show another one, right? So we had like checked image and unchecked image. Then we just added a class to the checkbox, and then we have an event emitter for the tab event, and we have a checked property that we can bind to. And then just to complete that, we have like an on-tab function, right? So this is just a standard Angular 2 component. The only thing that is particularly special about the NativeScript is just what goes inside the template, right? Because the UI in the mobile is slightly different than you would have in the web. Having created this component, we could then go and create like a view where we can display different items, and then we can use straight away our checkbox and bind to the check property and as well to the tab event. This is just the standard Angular 2 code, right? This is the stuff you know inside out. So what does a NativeScript really give you? Like I mentioned before, we give you native UI. So you get native performance, native user experience, native animations, everything that you would expect from a native application. You also get maximum code skill reusability. So what you can see here is on the left, we have actually a web application written in Angular 2, and these are two mobile applications for iOS and Android. But you're using exactly the same skills as you would use just for building the web application. And Angular 2 itself is a first-class citizen for NativeScript. So we have a specific integration for Angular 2 within NativeScript, which basically means that you can straight away use Angular 2 to target Android, iOS, and web using just the standard Angular 2, right? And then finally, and this is really, really a big deal, you get this direct access to a native API. And so, for example, if I wanted to create a pop-up in NativeScript, I could literally just call new UI alert view, set a message, add button with title, call show, and I get a pop-up, right? This is just an example of how we do it at the low level. There's also an abstraction layer that actually you don't have to write iOS or Android specific code, but the thing is you can when you have to, right? And then similarly, we can do the same thing for Android. If you want to create, let's say, time object, you could just say new android.text.format.time, call set, and you can just do some formatting, etc. And all that code pretty much runs on a JavaScript virtual machine within the application. Yeah. So why is this important? If, for example, Apple were to release a new functionality for iOS that allows you to teleport your phone from one side of the room to another, right? I mean, everybody wants that. So what you have to do is just download the latest version of Xcode. It's just like 4 gigabytes. Then basically, you could check the documentation and see what code you have to write. Just add these few lines of code in JavaScript, then rebuild your application, put it in your phone disappears here, appears there. You get day zero support because we basically allow you to hook up to the latest functionality straight away, right? Then Android catches up later on, and we can actually wrap it as a nice plugin for you so that you don't have to do it in the future. But we do take care of those kind of things. There's one really other cool thing that you can do in NativeScript. In order to style your application, we went with CSS as the language or as the syntax to allow you to style your apps. So you can, set the color, font size, width, and quite a lot of different things. The only thing is that we had to implement each of those properties ourselves, which means that we don't give you all of the CSS that's available, but it's the same mentality. So if you want to see which properties we support, you can just check our documentation, and you can just look for the supported properties, and there's a whole list of those. The interesting thing is that the first time I did this talk, like over 2 years ago, we only had these 3. So intentionally, I never update this slide because I feel very attached to it. It's like, this is the slide that's going to survive everything. It's going to survive even you, believe me. The one important thing as well to remember is that what you have in the web is not the same as in the mobile application, right? So when you're trying to design a web application, a mobile app, and they work for the same service, you shouldn't expect exactly the same UI. Like, for example, if you're trying to display data on 24-inch screen in a web browser, you're going to put it in a grid, right? 20 columns, no problems, right? Try to put it on a 5-inch screen. It's not going to work. So automatically your user experience, the way you design everything is different. And so are the UI components that you use in the mobile. So for example, in a web, you would use a div. On Android, iOS, there's no such thing as div. We will give you different types of layout. You have like absolute layout, dock layout, grid, stack, wrap, and we just adding Flexbox as well. Well, we added it 2 days ago, so you can use it as well. So let me show you a quick demo, and then we move on to the second part of the presentation. So let's see. We got one thing, we got second thing. Let's make it, oh, too big, too big. Is that big enough? That should do it. All right. So how do we do like a hello world example? So we start with, basically, we have a label. We set with text set to hello world. I build that, and I get nice hello world just over here. This is basically Angular 2 code. I also have style. Let's say this is not big enough. You can't see it, so I have a style called big. So what I can do is just say class equals big. Save this. And I'm pretty much, I run a builder that like has a folder watcher. So every time I make changes, it automatically updates, right? OK, so we have big. We have some other things, like imagine if I just wanted to bind to the text property. So in my class, I have a message property. So in my class, I have here a message string that has hello Warsaw. Or since I'm a Southpaw, I should know how to spell my own capital. So I can do it this way. And that should refresh at some point. There you go. So what if I wanted to do some like conditional styling? Imagine we had a flag called all good. Let's make it Boolean. And then by default, I could say it's true. And also, I'm going to add a function, call it do something. Anyone done clean code before? You know, this is the best name for a function you can think of. So what if I say this all good is the opposite of this all good every time I tap it? So let's save that. And then so I have this flag here called warning. So what I'm going to do is this. Let's use Angular's condition binding. So I say class warning equals where all good, let's say false. I could write it shorter as well, but I just want to show that you can write whole expressions, etc. So having saved that, we also need a button. So the button, let's call it tap me. And then in here, we're just going to call do something. There's going to be a miracle if I have no typing mistakes. And there we are. And we can switch between styles. We can do some other things. Like I could add a label which gives me like a calming message so that I don't panic whenever we have a warning. So what if I say ng if, I think that's the syntax, and I can say all good. Let's add exclamation mark. And the message that will calm us down will be panic, panic, run for your life. I don't know about you, but it'll calm me down, you know, especially if you're in a plane and it's about to crash and you see the label popping in and out. That's kind of cool, yeah? So one other thing we can do in here is, like I mentioned before, we have animations inside NativeScript. So what if what I can do is just add some keyframes. So in the keyframes, I could, for example, just say I want to start by transforming my object to set it to 50% of the size. Then after 40% of the time, I want to set it to 130%. And at the end, back to the normal size. And I can choose different things. I can rotate. I can move things around. I can make it fade in, rotate, like loads of different things. So now that I have these keyframes, I can set it as my animation and say, I want to run it, let's say run it over 3 seconds to wow you a little bit more. So there we are. So you kind of like get this zoom in effect, which is kind of cool. And since I'm a lazy developer, I basically went to this guy, this Danden. He created this library that has like a lot of different animations. So I actually imported his CSS file, literally copied it and pasted it into my project, which allows me to use some of his animations. So one of them, rubber band, which you seen a moment ago. Let's see, let it refresh. And kind of like we can this squishy-washy effect. We have another one, which is bouncing left, which kind of like sliding from the side. Let's let it slide in. So it kind of just gets in. And then the last one is kind of bounce, which comes from the top. So let it refresh. So it kind of like bounces it from the top. And pretty much all I had to do is just import that CSS and start using the animation that I got from Danden, which is quite impressive. Some of the really cool things that we get with NativeScript is there's loads of NPM packages that I can use. And there's quite a lot of them written specifically for NativeScript. One of them is NativeScript Color Picker, which is a really cool component, which allows me to do something like this. Let me come back to my module. Here we are. So I already did the import before coming here to save myself time. So what I'm doing is requiring first the NativeScript color picker and a color type. And then I'm going to add a function. So what I'm doing is this. I'm creating an instance of the color picker. I also create a selected color and set it up as gray. And then I have a function, show color picker, right? And the show color picker does this thing. It will first call the picker show and pass in the current selected color as the input value. And when the user chooses a color, I'm just basically going and updating the selected color. Nice and easy. So what I can do now is, let's go to my button, do selected color equals, right. I knew I would mess it up. So what I'm binding to is background color, and I'm binding to selected color. Yeah, that makes more sense. So let it refresh. And you see, by default, the button is ugly gray, but this happened before. What's going on? My mistake was I actually have to call it. Just adding a function is not going to call itself. It's Angular, but it's magic, but it's not this kind of magic. All right, let's try again. See, I was expecting one of you to catch the bug. I'm so disappointed. Not funny. There we are. So now I can change it to kind of pinkish. That didn't work. Why did it not work? All right, let me say again. Now I'm trying to change to, let's say, pinkish. Hey, it works. Or, kind of dark bluish, Let's match my t-shirt. That's more or less NativeScript t-shirt, kind of blue. Pretty cool. And a really cool thing about this is a native color picker. And I have equivalent for it for Android. So with the same code, I pretty much get the same behavior for both Android and iOS, which is quite impressive. What else do I want to show you? Actually, that's it for this example. So there's another project that I have, which I think is pretty cool, which, since we are in Angular, we can do a lot of code sharing. So I have this example. So I'm going to run it in the background while let it build. Put it full screen for now. So I have this example where I have single project, and my aim is to share the services and the components between mobile and web. So what I have here is I start with this app component. So at the beginning, I'm setting up my app routes, and I'm saying I'm going to have homepage, products, avatar. So all my routing is shared, like, it's set up as one thing. Then I have a main file for NativeScript. So in this case, I'm just saying, okay, I'm going to use this app routes and use the NativeScript router. But then, similarly, I have the main file for the web. And in this case, I'm just using a standard router module from Angular. But they use exactly the same router. Another thing that I can do is I have, for example, a SAS variables. So in here, I can set up all my branding. And then I can basically create one SAS file for web, one SAS file for mobile. But the cool thing is that as much as the CSS files are two separate, but they share the same variables. So if one day my company decides to change the branding from pink to orange, or I can change it just in one place and share it everywhere, which is kind of cool. But that's just the beginning. The really cool thing is like, okay, I want to create this avatar view where I can show some really cool pictures. So I created an avatar service, and the avatar service has two functions. One is get possible parts. So it goes to API Adorable IO and then gets all the possible parts. So what noses, mouths, and eyes can you have? And then it returns it returns to the user. The second function is if I provide a selected eyes, nose, and mouth, it gives me a URL for an image, right? So that's my service. So having that service, then I can go and create a component. So my component uses this avatar service. And what I'm doing here is as well, like I have 3 sets of arrays, one for all the eyes, nose, and mouth. And as well in the constructor, when I loaded the first time, I call get possible parts from the avatar service. And then I'm copying the eyes, noses, and mouths into the arrays. Yeah? And then the final function I have is reload avatar. So every time I change one of those, I can force it to reload the picture. Yeah? You still with me? Now is the exciting part. So having done all that, I can now have web HTML. So here's where the difference comes in. This is the moment when I'm actually saying, this is going to be a website, right? This is the UI that's going to use the avatar service and avatar component, but the UI is going to be web specific. So in here, I'm saying I want to have a button, and using ng4, I'm just basically creating a button for each, let's say, each of the available eyes. Then I do each for available noses and mouths. And then on click, what I do is just change the selected eyes index and then reload the avatar, which means that I can do something like this. Where are we? So let's change one thing. So let me go to the avatar page, load it. And this was me preparing the presentation last night. And kind of like, hey, what's going on? So I can kind of change that. So that's how I build it for the web. So what do I do for the mobile now in order to make it work? So I have a separate HTML file for the mobile. I already scaffolded most of it. And what I can do is basically say this. Okay, in this case, I just want to create a label for each of the available eyes. And instead of click, I have on tap event, because in mobile, you don't click, you tap. Right? It's different. And then, but I do exactly the same thing inside. I'm just saying, okay, update the selected index and reload avatar. And then I can do the same thing for noses and the same thing for mouths. And then finally, what I need is somewhere where I can display the picture. So I actually have an image, and I'm binding to source of the avatar SRC, which is bound to the reload. So if I let it rebuild, I have my application. I think it's still rebuilding. Let's go to avatar page. Yeah, it's still rebuilding. Let's see. You're rebuilding. Applying changes. And now I have avatar. And I can kind of change 2 different eyes, noses, mouth. Depending on the Wi-Fi, it kind of works faster or slower. But you get the idea. And the cool thing is that I have the same pretty much code and sharing, and I can kind of have similar applications for both the web and mobile, which is pretty amazing, if I say so. All right, cool. So let's get back to the world domination, because that's why you came here. Like, nobody wants to know about everything else, technology or whatever, right? If you can't dominate the world. So let's do a quick roundup of, like, can we dominate the world? Can we, take over? Trump is trying. Well, we might as well prepare ourselves. So is it possible? The obvious answer is yes, it's possible. All you need is a minion, right? One cute minion. One is not going to do. How about the 3 minions? 3? No? How about 1,000? No, I don't have more. Come on, guys. Help me. Anyway, so since I can't have the little cuddly and a bit psychotic yellow minions, I had to go with something else. And this story is actually inspired by Adrian Ferreres from Barcelona, who introduced me to MIP. right? So he showed me his application, and then kind of like he could actually go forward, backwards, left, right, you know, some of the basic stuff. And straight away in my head, it was just like, yeah, I'm going to have Robo Party, you know, it's going to be amazing. And then I was like, yeah, let's do that. So Adrian published his code on GitHub, and I looked at it, and there was like, you know, showed how to connect to the project and everything. And I was kind of quite excited. And there was this thing which is like, code what the fuck in one of the functions. I was just like, I'm calling Adrian, and he was like, hey, what is the WTF? Does it stand for something technical or something? I was like, no, it is what the fuck. I was like, yeah, I thought so, but why? And he was like, here's the thing. I'm trying to talk to the robot. I'm telling him how to move forward, at what speed, and there's this one variable. I have no idea what it does, but if I put the value between 2000 and 3000, it works, but if I go outside of that, it doesn't. So I was like, what the fuck? So I was like, dude, we can't do what the fuck in open source. Like, who's going to swear in front of all these people all the time, right? I certainly wouldn't. So I was like, okay, we have to level it up a little bit. So I was like, let me start from scratch. I'm going to take all this project as a lesson learned, and let's do something about it. And one of the other things that we have as a learning part is community. Like for me, this project was all about community, what I learned from community and how I could push it. So one of the first things I needed as well was Bluetooth, a way to talk to the robot. So that I could scan, connect to the robot, and send a bunch of commands. And as community has it, in NativeScript, we have NativeScript Bluetooth, right? So, okay, npm install bang, okay, I can make some commands here. Another thing is like we have to understand a little bit how Bluetooth works. So every Bluetooth device will have a profile, which is basically a list of things it can do. So then we have a bunch of services, and service basically says like, oh, whether you can push some information, whether you can receive some information and stuff, and they kind of group a bunch of characteristics. And characteristics are more of like endpoints where you can issue commands and you can actually perform operations. And there's quite a lot of them. So luckily in the documentation, they just told me, like, if you want to send instructions to the robot, just use this service UID and this characteristic UID. Okay, now it's nice and easy. Then the next thing is like there's this commands protocol that kind of tells us how to use it. And funny enough, in the documentation, there's no what the fuck. They actually say what that variable actually is, so I was like, hey, I can fix that. So there's one specific function that I use, it's called continuous drive. So you kind of send a command every 50 milliseconds, and you tell the robot how fast to move forward or backwards and how to turn, right? And you keep going that. And if you're not satisfied with how fast it goes, it's got a crazy speed. And it goes crazy because it keeps falling down, little idiot. So I said, like, okay, I can do that. But then there was the first gotcha. When I had to send the attributes inside to the robot, I couldn't just pass a number. What I had to do is I had to convert the number into a hexadecimal equivalent of the string and even add 0x for every parameter. I was like, well, yeah, it's not too bad. I can do that. So using that, I could start sending commands telling the robot how to move about. But the next part was like, the robot can actually give me information like what's your battery level, how far you traveled this week, etc. So, but to use that, I had to do this kind of thing where on one side, in the robot, you have to add a listener that always listens to anything the robot has to tell you. But on another side, you have to tell robot to kind of give you the data. So here's the thing. In one service, you say, hey, what's going on? And then he responds here. It's like, you talk to this guy, and here's where you hear the answer. Okay. So, and then you basically have to handle it on notify to kind of whenever you receive the thing. So obviously we have a data service at a different address for receiving data and a different for sending. So that I could use, let's say, read odometer, which gives me distance. But then there was a second gotcha, which I named Are You For Real? Which basically means when I was receiving data from the robot was giving me this. I was getting a bunch of numbers, and I didn't quite know because the numbers didn't make sense at the beginning. And what I realized I was getting ASCII values, I was getting a bunch of numbers. So each number was a number of the ASCII character for each of the values. So then if I converted these ASCII numbers into characters, I was getting a number in string. And then I had to parse the string into a number, right? You with me? So I was getting numbers, a bunch of numbers, to convert to a string to get a bunch of numbers. And then I converted to a bunch of strings to display it on the screen, just for fun. And then I was like, well, yeah, I can do it. Clean code, sort it out. And to ease all the pain with the robots, basically, I created the MIP BLE library that allows you to kind of avoid all the Bluetooth stuff. So if you're using NativeScript, you can just import this plugin and then start using. So you can just tell MIP, just move, turn left, turn right. No what the fucks, I promise. So I don't have a lot of time, but I can just very briefly just show you a tiny example of the code. Let me see if I can connect my phone. They're gonna kill me. It's fine. All right. So site sync. So I'm gonna show you what I have on my phone.
Okay, Sebastian.
Should I just show the robot? All right, I'll show you the project after. So, just to do the show off. So I've got these little guys running around. Let's do that. I need to show the robots. They came here for that. This is the main thing. So, one of the things, since I can't show you the screen, I'll connect to one of them. One of them must have gone green. Perfect. And I'm going to connect to the other one. Perfect. So one of the ways to control him, I have accelerometer. So I can kind of go like, hey, can control the robots with my hand, you know, just like, come to Papa, come on. Who's your daddy? He doesn't like me, you know, come on. Do you like me? Do you love me? Nah, he doesn't like me. So, you know, and using Android 6, I can actually control 8 of them. So, you know, I can say, hey, stop fighting. Seriously, children this day. All right, stop it. All right, let's, no, come back. All right, I need to kill the app because they'll kill themselves. All right, calm down. Oh. All right, just to wrap it up, then it's pretty much just one screen I want to show you. If you want to learn about NativeScript, there's a tutorial that teaches you step by step how to use it with Angular. There's another one that teaches vanilla JavaScript. The project where I was showing you how to do the code sharing, which uses Webpack, is this one. You can use that. And for my robot project is the last one. So pretty much, all right. Thank you very much.